We are Tag Theater, the Minority Report, Kudmak Noy, and Karam Cup, obviously. This has been a conversation that's going on with regards to how minorities interact with our city, what we are to Berlin, or to Germany for that matter, and what Berlin is to us. We speak of our relationship with this city in terms of our society, the political alliances we built or the politics we run, the economic enfranchisement or disfranchisement we have in it, and how our future is going to be as part of Berlin and us as minorities. We have had so far 2 shows. The last show was stationed a week ago, this very moment, on a Sunday evening. We had a chat about information flows with regards to who has the power to provide news when it comes to being a migrant, what part of news or propaganda that we are used to in the places that we've left, what kind of news and propaganda that we receive here, and the difficulty of realizing what news or real information versus propaganda is, and what the future of informational flows has been. Today's conversation will be about representation and voices, and a little has to do with the economics of how we get to manage ourselves to live in the city. Today's specific conversation will regard the following. In this third episode, we're going to have ownership or voice or representation, and we will critically examine the representation of different groups in mainstream culture. We'll explore how cultures interact and intersect, the individuals and events that shape public opinion, and the involvement of diverse voices in public processes. The episode also sheds light on the representation of individuals without status or not belonging to national population and the entry of new ideas and innovation into various sectors. So this one will have a tad to do with economic enfranchisement and where we are at the moment. And I am very happy to meet you all here at the courtyard of Tag Theater or the Aufbauhaus building, directly coming to you near Moritzplatz. I am here with very esteemed guests that I'm very happy to introduce. I would like for you to introduce themselves. Welcome. Introduce yourself to us.
Thank you. I am Ali Moraly, a musician and a writer.
A little bit more. A little bit more.
I live in Berlin since 2018. I do teach, however, outside of Berlin. I teach my instrument that I play, the violin. And also I compose music, mostly music that I play myself. And I'm a writer as well. I write on various cultural domains, mostly music, and related arts, whether in within the Arab-speaking world or here in Europe. I cover events and performances and deliver reviews upon them.
Do you also perform at set dates in Berlin, or?
What is it, set gate?
Set dates, as in are you a performer as well?
Yes, I do perform.
Yeah.
Tonight I'm going to perform.
Yes.
Before you, so I'm very delighted to announce that. Let's stick to that date first and see what happened.
Excellent. Okay. Khabit, will you please introduce yourself to us?
Yes, of course. My name is Khabit Ebob Enow, and I came to Germany as the daughter to an asylum seeker. And while I'm in Germany, I'm an activist, and I've been working with specifically Black communities for over a decade now. And I do different things, feasibility studies, project management, and have worked with the major Black community organizations in Berlin. And apart from that, I'm not sure if apart from that, I am a dressmaker and love really working on transformation and change.
And where, pray tell, can we buy these fabulous dresses of yours, if I may ask?
Yeah, I think, thank you so much.
Have you an online portal for us?
Yes, I think the reason why I'm here today, it's specifically because of the work I initiated in 2022, after 3 days after the war broke out in Ukraine. I have been doing projects on flight migration and integration, but they have never been practical. That was the first time I worked with new arrivals and did evacuation work, like emergency response and, yeah, integration.
Excellent. My name is Fetewei. I am with Karam and Johannes Braun. I'm organizing this Civic City Conversations. I believe these conversations are important in realizing who we are and what we mean to this part of the world. And that heritage being important, our future depends on how we form connections that helps us sustainably go through this society, be it economically, societally, politically, or mentally for that matter. In that event, since we are talking representation, let me ask with what sounds to be the most simplest as well the most complex question I could think of. Are we, the three of us sitting here, are we expats or migrants?
I would say I am a citizen. And the reason why I feel I'm a citizen, not because of any status that had been given to me by any official authority, nor because of any travel document, rather because of an intimate bilateral social contract that I have with the city in which I am resident. The city, for it is an urban being, and me as a human being. So I perceive my relationship to the city irrespective of the official presentation enforced on me, whether by the government or by the institution. It's just a form of bond I have with the city in which I live, whether it is Berlin or in Damascus, based on love and respect.
And do you believe this place has enough love and respect and comradeship as you see fit?
I tend to form my relationship to the city as urban being. And for me, every city has something to give, because I feel that cities, wherever they are, can provide that energy that is derived from a continuum of history. So it's not based on my relationship to individuals or communities, but rather it's a relationship, a metaphorical relationship between me and the place, the space, and the people who are inhabiting the space.
Then I redirect this question, Khabit. Are we citizens, expats, or migrants?
So maybe before we continue, I don't know if we can rearrange the sitting
By all
position,
means.
because the sun is hitting on my face.
Excellent.
Shall we exchange?
Well, the sun
No,
will be
I will
hitting on
I
your
will
face, so maybe we can
Move it
find
to
a
your side
solution
bit,
which
and then
it's good for all
this is a
of
nice
us.
thing to do in the middle of a live show.
Rearrangement.
Well done. Just go there. Maybe that's
Well, we still have it.
Then I should stand.
Okay.
Okay. Maybe you move here and I move here. That's better. Yeah. Yes. Okay.
Was that my?
Yes. I am not afraid of the sun.
Can you help me? Nice. If we are citizens, expats, migrants.
Are we all? Are we one or both? It's the question is, you can all be all. You can also be just one.
Yeah.
And also you need to perhaps differentiate the difference amongst those as you see fit.
Well, there's a definition, the dictionary definition of all of these words, irrespective of how we see ourselves or see each other. And well, it's interesting to see the dynamics of these words. An expert who's the similarities is just that they, apart from citizens, but even citizens nowadays have been migrants before, could have been experts before. So it's really, words are not just words. Words are very important, and depending on who is using that word in public discourses, there might be a dehumanization, empathy, or negative connotations. For example, an expert is actually could be also said to be a migrant or a migrant worker. But why do we choose to call them experts? Because the connotation behind being an expert is something which has been put in public discourse as something which is nice. It's a nice person, no conflicts with this person, but also the privileges of the person have brought them this niceness, empathy, and humanization of their position. On the other side, being a migrant or being a refugee, it's titles which are given by others to people. So I find it very interesting that you choose to be a citizen, because that's very empowering. It's a position coming from you and your relationship, and not others placing, naming or putting a label on you. But these labels are still very important. We need to talk about them. I see myself as a migrant, depending on the political discourse. So I turn to to change my skin like a snake, because I also play around with those who put labels. So I decide now if I want to confront you, take up this label to confront you, or if I confront you with another narrative which you are not used to put you out of your comfort zone. But economically, it's very important that we look at these terms. It was interesting that Al Jazeera, for example, decided to stop using refugees, but to use migrants. Of course, in public discourses, those who are determining public discourses, they determine also how much humanity would be granted or taken away through the labels, which means we are being manipulated by the labels. And by doing that, I think while we talk about communities, minorities, if I'm talking about migrant workers, then it's the negative connotation behind it are people who are being exploited. But when I talk about experts, these are migrant workers, but I would never think of experts. I would never think of exploiting experts in the way I would think of exploiting refugee migrant workers, like the ones who have now, the label of migrant workers have been put on them with a negative connotation and the permission for exploitation.
In that way, the sun went down, and as you can see now, all is good. But let me add this, though. The reason I ask this question is, whenever we talk of experts, we merely decline that these are skillful people empowered in their citizenry as opposed to any other, such that they have merely changed the location, but they have had that citizenship or power that they have. With the name migrant comes certain connotations, negative, as I see them most of the time, but possibly positive as well, as on somebody's unwantedness or otherness is expressed far more. And that otherness is connotated on the migrant label, even though this migrant actually comes to do essential human needs that need to keep society moving. Such is the nature of this part of society, aging as we speak, and therefore in the healthcare sector, in the IT sector, it is full of migrants now that power this country's industry, economy, and society. And yet the label matters. Because as soon as you are in the expat level, you are in that level where society sees you as their own and as equivalent. But if you are to be called a migrant, it takes that importantness that I look at the other way. What do you think of this, Ali?
It's interesting paradox because semantically, I suppose expat means out of her or his or its country, right? It's expatria, which is minimizing label, if you want, while migrant, it has the power of mobility. It has also the power of transforming one's identity. So I would definitely accept migrant rather than being expat, because expat feels too static, while being a migrant is giving me that possibility to remain in constant change and develop that immense power of adaptation. So I personally definitely identify with all of those labels, as you mentioned. And I'm also here in Germany because of the war. But as an artist, I always tend to resist being labeled and being domesticated within a box of representation, because this is going to be very restrictive to me and to my artistic choices. So I always try on a personal level and with lots of emotional labor to navigate through the labels and to pick up one for myself whenever I feel the need for that particular label and not the other.
Yeah, so I find it very interesting that sometimes this being an expert is being seen as static, but experts are these people who live with the most temporarities, because the difference between an expert and a migrant is that the migrant will probably stay, and that's why there's so much fear for the migrant than the experts, but the experts are those who are constantly in movement. So they're not coming to stay, they're coming to go to other places.
If it's rephrased, the way I would say is somebody with enough economic power that the world is their oyster and they could be anywhere. So that is to say they are as much a citizen of this country as much as they could be another country's citizenship, for they get the services and quality of life that they would get in theirs. This is a bit of an OECD definition. I don't want it, but I want to say it. But the permanentness of migrants is they come to take our jobs is what follows it most of the time. Speaking of migrants, I find it very important that Khabit tells us the story of a very interesting thing that she has done in the year of 2022. It is the Tubman Network's wonderful work with students from Africa, specifically students coming from Ukraine when the war started. After this siren,
a moment of silence.
Indeed. And after this very loud sirens noise, Khabit will tell us the story. What happened in 2022 early?
Yes, in 2022, when the war occurred, I was not aware of it. I was aware that there was a tension, and I was aware that something might happen, and if it happens, it will be very bad. But that was in February when it happened, and in February is Black History Month, and most of the Black organizations are hyper active, because that's when a lot of different activities are going on. As a project manager and a Black community leader, that's the peak of my work period. So when the war broke out, I wasn't aware. I got aware through the requests people were sending. of, do you know what we can do? I'm missing this person. Do you know how we can organize to get, like, find where people are? At that moment, I didn't even know where Ukraine is actually on the map. My bad geographical understanding or knowledge of Europe. So these requests were becoming so much that I couldn't sleep at night. And I decided now to make a call out to the communities, because I knew I definitely can do that. But I had resources which are very valuable. And I think for most minority communities, there are resources that they need to put in place, which helps them in time of difficulties, which was networks. So I knew I had good networks. I had worked with most of the Black community organizations in Berlin. So I could call out, I could send a call out and then see who pops up. So this call out went out on the night of the 27th of February 2022. And on the evening of 28th of February 2022, I was hoping 10 people would show up, but in the end, this was over 200 people showed up online and at the premises of each one. And by the next day, the building was full with goods. So we were evacuating people, bringing them to Germany, safer spaces, and inquiring if they want to stay or if this is just a safe passage for them, assisting with medical support and whatever they needed at that time. Yeah, so it's also the contribution of migrants and the experiences also of migrants. Like in 2014, 2015, we had experienced things in Berlin, most especially at Oranienplatz, what was going on, who were the favorite migrants, who were not the favorite migrants, how resources were distributed, and so on. So as a community, we learned that we cannot afford to wait for the government to be active. And we learned that certain people will be left out. So when people are left out, it takes also those communities who have the awareness to react. So that's what we did.
Would you say there was a lateness in response to what happens to people of color as opposed to the Ukrainians that came to Germany? Is it institutional, this lateness in response, or is it always that some have to fend for themselves?
Well, the reason we started it, because even at the borders, there was already a discrimination and dehumanization happening, which means Europeans were considered, people with darker skin tones, not only Africans, were also facing discrimination. And this discrimination, I would say it's institutional and it's continuities of colonialism and enslavement, because it was only certain people who faced this kind of discrimination. So arrival in Germany, it's the same thing. So while people were coming to Germany, they got a warm welcome at the train station and they were thinking, oh, how beautiful is this place. You come and everyone welcomes you at the train station. You get a place to eat, you get nice food, you get to know people welcome you into their houses. So it was a kind of a utopia which we don't know as people living here, we've never heard. But these are the modification of our being here, experiencing things, reorganizing. So by the time people arrived here, it wasn't clear if they can stay here. The EU had said, please open your borders, let people pass. But now it was left for the nation states to decide. And while it was already clear that Ukrainian citizens can stay, can work, certain privileges was given to them. Others stayed till maybe last year, October, with uncertainties if they can stay or if they have to go. Yeah. So we see these continuities of discrimination and even exploitation, because then if people come to a place where they're not allowed, they don't know if they can stay, they still need to exist. Social welfare. the lines of social welfare are long, so there again, there needs to be a prioritization, and who gets prioritized, even when the state says there are resources for everyone.
Okay. Let me bring it back to what we were talking about. We can also continue it this way. Do we lack effective political lobbying? Do we lack solidarity with regards to other Prus who are otherwise discriminated? Have we failed in terms of making a broader coalition of people, be it, taken out because of war from Syria or the current Ukrainian case notwithstanding, or Eritrea? Have we, from time to time or all the time, lacked the means to work together in terms of having an effective political lobby? Or are we stopped from doing such a thing in somehow?
I don't have much to say about that.
We'll get to the cultural part soon. Yeah. Let's get to the representation soon, at least.
I would say we do not lack representation. There's a difference if I have people who can represent me and I don't get the necessary attention, as I do not have those resources in place. We need to recognize that migrant communities are well organized. Like if you go into the NGO sector and take a look at how many community organizations are there, they are there. They are working under unbearable conditions, people burning out constantly because of lack of resources. When there are no resources, when there are change of governments, when like for every household there's a budget, right? So there's also a budget in the sector of working with migrants and so on. Depending on the political ruling, the budgets will be cut down drastically. But these communities are already working on their extremely low budget.
And on the fringes.
Yeah. So they're left on their own, and they are advocating always, and they are still doing the work without the financial assistance or with the financial assistance. I think minority communities have understood that they are on their own, and it takes them, it takes each other, it takes the networking with other minority organizations to push forward the political agenda, which means you would see the different intersections, and when they identify these intersections, they always try to team up, because we need all of these communities to face the discrimination we are facing, or the common discrimination we are facing.
We'll get right back to this, but I would like to get...
It's a very interesting conversation. I'm excited about hearing more about that. Please go ahead.
But you're also here because as an artist, I have questions for you as well, or a person who works in the cultural sector. I'm glad to know that. Can I ask you this question? Is otherness an advantage when it comes to cultural work in Berlin? In other words, if you are, say, from where we come from, being exotic, is it quite the benefit to be an artist? In other words, do you have more to give, more to represent?
It is a very comfortable otherness at the very beginning, but then when you want to break loose out of the representations box in which you find yourself, it becomes a burden. So I'm all for representation if that's a way to give communities a space to express themselves. But I'm also, maybe I'm an old-fashioned here, but I still believe in universalism. Well, let's say a colonialism-free universalism, a universalism that is not a part of the imperial tradition, rather than a bottom-up universalism, and in where we can actually share each other's culture, and when we can feel that culture of every community, of every group belongs to each one of us. And therefore, as artists, can we just own culture and heritage as humanity?
Yeah, go on, go on. But can that possibly thrive in a capitalistic system where your outputs determine who you are and what you are?
That requires a lot of struggle, intellectual as well as emotional struggle, in order to acquire what I like to call cultural sensitivity. I mean by that, when we want to approach culture and heritage as something belongs to all humanity, we have to not only stop at deep learning and research, but also sincere and genuine affinity with the diversity of cultures. Because sometimes I feel that is unfortunate when I perform a piece by Johann Sebastian Bach. This is considered to be a universalist music, while when I want to approach, for instance, Ethiopian music, then I have to see if this is if I have a right to do so, because I consider Ethiopian music as universalist as Bach music. So for me, I am devoted to the effort in order to break loose out of these restricting representations, which will end up creating some sort of boundaries between cultures, and figuring out a way to communicate as human beings within a universal society. That's a dream for which I work hard, and of course there is still to be done in order to do so. But for me, it's very, very important to separate between universalism and humanism as ideas and projects, and the colonial tradition that was embedded within those projects. So there should be a way to save the universalist dream.
Yeah. Could the universalist, okay, then back to the reality of how art and the artist and its spread of art to the world, governed by forces that are quite out of our control. Could it be that we may impose a cultural tax so that the minorities thrive among this system, so that universality thrives? Could a sort of endorsement or...
Well, there's a reason why people have been asking for reparations, right? Because reparations, in a certain way, it's giving this option of, first of all, recognizing that there's a disproportionate distribution of what belongs to someone, or what should belong to all of us, and also recognizing that there's a commodification of certain resources which should belong to everyone, by recognizing that we are giving ourselves the opportunity to restructure things, and going forward to say, okay, we need this to be renegotiated. We need an apology which is reconciling whatever pain has been caused through people who were involved. It's interesting to know that in the case of reparation, it's not just addressing the people who have been disenfranchised, but also the people who, in this case, could be seen as harm doers. So, which means the person who has, or the people who are being seen as harm doers, are also promising that for the sake of the humanity and a better future, we decide and we decide that for the future we would not be doing this. So whatever has been disproportionately distributed has to be redistributed. I find it very interesting because you put it in another way, but I see this like in the case of confronting harm through, restorative justice and reparations.
Punishment leading for the thing not to happen again, but also as reimbursement and remuneration.
Well, not really punishment, but recognition that this does harm. So it's not like punishment, it's like when we all recognize that this is harmful to us, to our planet, to our neighbors, to whoever, then we have the responsibility to fix it. So it's they're taking responsibility for the change, for the transformation.
Let me ask this question because it was asked last time and I found it very important. We talked for about a second about what the hell integration means. And a friend of mine said, yes, I'm being asked to integrate to what Germany is. And it's not much, it's rules of law and society. But while I'm trying to integrate with you, you're not willing to integrate with me, my culture, my heritage, my ancestry. Is there such a way that culture could be the biggest force in redressing the injustice that has happened to either minorities or any other group that feels disenfranchised?
Well, I guess there wouldn't be any issue with integration if we agree upon the fact that the process of forming an identity is a transformative one. I mean by that we tend to give away components of our own identity, but we also tend to keep components that we wish to have in that process. So as long as it is respected that that transformation of that morphing self is not enforced and it's let go as an ontological and an organic process, then integration in that sense can lead into what I would like to see as a form of participation. Only when integration becomes a form of participation, then it is liberated from that loadedness that it carries as a term.
But yeah.
I think the loadedness is, it's not by default. The loadedness is there to give a certain connotation on certain people. So in every society, integration happens, whether we are surveying the integration or not. Immediately when I come into a new society, I need to know where I get my food, what do people eat there, you know, which currencies do they use. So integration is something which is fluid. In all, it's universal, it's fluid. So the connotation or the weaponizing of that, it's what's problematic, to be seen as certain people do not have the skills to integrate, but we all have that, it's universal. And we all move, and we all know that when we get somewhere, we might be irritated by the language, but then curiosity is being also sparked. And automatically, we make moves. So now, saying certain people do not want to integrate, certain people take long to integrate, certain people must learn our language, certain people must do this and that, that's where we have a problem, because it's not about the people, it's about people who determine public discourses and how they want society to see these people. And whatever way they're talking about people and integration, that's the way the society starts reacting. But generally, we are all always integrating. The German society, the way Germanness was seen 30, 40 years ago, 50 years ago, would never be the same Germanness we'll be seeing today or tomorrow. So even this society itself, it's integrating in itself and it's molding itself with the new people coming, with the old people. It's always happening.
But you said something very interesting there. I don't know if I got it right. The people who dictate these terms on TVs and the influential people who write about integration.
Yes, politicians, the way we hear people speak.
Yeah, but when we're told somebody
the way resources are being distributed, how much money is being put into integration classes, how do you look at someone who is taking integration classes versus someone who is taking classes at the university, but also both came the same time, learning the language and so on.
Yeah, but the person who's on TV telling me about this also has a funny connotation. I won't name names, but somebody explained a certain TV personality considered as a migrant who's integrated was quite removed because they were third generation and they have lived in this country their whole life and they were far more German than Germans. And this were the person they put on a conversation, on a TV, on a pedestal to say, what is our problem with integration and explain this. I won't name names, Johannes, but but I found it slightly curious because this person who was 3-4 times removed a generation but has a funny name which sounds outside-ish, and therefore this person being the panelist on a conversation with regards to how we're not integrating is curious. Which begs the question, do we not have enough of people who look like us or like him or anybody that can explain what you just said in actual bigger platforms? Are we lacking certain, I wouldn't want to call them VIPs, but influential public intellectuals who can describe what you just described on an intellectual and public manner?
No, we don't. I don't think we lack that, because even in the political sphere, you have people like me, you have people like people who just arrived newly, you have people third generation, second generations, you have all of that. Like, the representation is there. I don't think the problem is representation. I think the problem is acceptance. Accepting that, accepting the reality. We are a diverse society. We are transitioning into different phases. Let's accept that we are a diverse society, and in a diverse society, and we are organizing fairly communities, then everyone needs to be represented, and the contribution of everyone needs to be recognized. So you and me and others who are coming, and those who would still come, they shape this community. Whether we give them the recognition or not, it's happening. Even those who do not even have what we will call legal passports, or the completely illegalized, they are not living separately from this community. They shape this community. They work. Their labor would be exploited, but it's money which is circulating in our society. We profit from certain services. We just need to recognize that and really sincerely shape communities in the way it is, rather than having a fantasy of what it should be and holding on to images which are not reality.
I only ask, my dear Khabit, because ever since they called it multiculturalism, and ever since it was declared dead, I've always asked myself, what is the future of migrants in Germany living together? What other name are going to give it to this spontaneous fusion of different societies coming to one? But most available thing that you see on a publication or anything that society reads, this is considered still a problem, while amongst the minorities there is a certain progress being made. Isn't there a disconnect, is what I'm asking? A disconnect as to integration being written in the Tagesspiegel 10 years after it was introduced, or after Merkel said multiculturalism has failed. We seem to integrate but not get enough of what is required to enfranchise ourselves in this society. But we seem to make progress with what gives, as you described in these NGOs, which are starved of money. The question there is, what gives? What is the disconnect there? Or why is there a disconnect?
Yeah, the disconnect would be something which Ali mentioned, like continuities, especially in colonialities, that we are using resources and knowledge from a time where we should have made advancements. And this is stopping us from...
Explain that part, the time we should have made advancement.
Okay, let's say 100 years ago, 200, let's even go to 500 years ago. What was the relationship between white missionaries, white governments, and Africans, or even Indians? So how has that changed till now? Books, trade treaties, resources that are being used globally, not to talk of the modern technologies we are using. So we still have those colonial relationships which are there. We are making progress. Migration will always be there, has always been there. Integration has always been there. We don't need to discuss this. This is a distraction. What we need to focus on is our relationship to one another, what we have learned, and start really sincerely repairing that. I think that's where we need to go. It's not that we do not have representation. It's that we are hanging on to old models, old patterns, old knowledge. Although we are aware that there is new knowledge, although we are aware that we should be having different conversations, we are not doing that. But we are holding on to whatever resources we have through these relationships, because through colonial relationships we still profit from certain things today, and we know it. There's a reason why the German government says we would do repatriation of human remains. But who is having the conversation of what that means for the future? Who is having the conversation of what are the reparations? Who is having the conversation on how would transformation happen? Because we now have decided that we want to give this, yes, we recognize that, but what does it mean for the future? What does it mean for our relationship? What does it mean for the books that have been written with certain things that are still being taught in schools, which also perpetuate and keeps this relationship? What kind of research is being done? So we need to come to ground level and be sincere with each other. If not, we will never move forward. We are just dancing in a circle, distracting ourselves with things that are not necessary for transformation.
You heard it from Khabit. I have a question for Ali. Is there such a thing for culture as well? Are you being asked to integrate, or have you ever had an instance where you as a skillful musician have been told, or maybe, I don't know, instances that you can think of in such a manner?
From my observation, it feels difficult to integrate within the cultural realm because of that notion of representation as such. There is a tendency to create what I entertain myself calling an Imbisskultur. Like, there is a Korean restaurant and there is a Chinese restaurant, and the more the better. That's how multiculturalism should look like. And in a parallel realm, there should be Arabic music or Syrian music, and sometimes it's very difficult for someone who is not approaching music as an identity rather as a transcendence of identity. For me, music is a way to shape my own voice, and that voice is the voice of the individual in conversation with not only the communal, but also the whole universe. So I see that question of integration within music, musical scene, and probably also more broadly in art and culture in general, is more of a restriction rather than a way to really communicate with other cultures and try to transcend that notion of food court or something like that. That is, everyone has his own culture and has to be only that scene, and has to be that instrument, that to be that costume, and that has to be that language. I look forward to a genuine kind of integration, which allows that vital transformation of identity, which we all live day by day, and it's not something imposed or enforced by any public discourse or any narrative.
Yeah. I was told that you are part of an orchestra. Was it Western Eastern Divan Orchestra? Has that informed your experience as well with regards to what we're talking about?
That was a long time ago, in 2005 and 2006, and that was also a wonderful opportunity to unother otherness.
Can you explain what the whole concept was?
That's the West Eastern Divan Orchestra was a project founded and directed by both the Palestinian intellectual Edward Said and the Israeli pianist and conductor Daniel Barenboim. And the idea was to bring musicians from Israel and Arab-speaking countries in order to be set in a formal orchestra and perform concerts with each other. And for me, that was a wonderful platform, first of all, to have a conversation upon what we agree on and upon what we disagree on, from one hand. On the other hand, that was also, for me, a very personal experience because I came up with that conviction that in order to really solve problems of the future, we need really to have a rebirth of universalism. We need a universalism for the future, as Khabit already mentioned, based on the recent reality in which we live, the amazing advancement in technology, namely in communication, and the problems we are facing all together in the globe, whether it's climate change, whether it's our relationship to technology, whether it's global prosperity, let alone global peace. These are issues that cannot be resolved by regressing away from the universalist utopia. Otherwise, it's going to be a dark dystopia as far as I can imagine.
And what did you mean by you unothering the otherness? Did you describe it as such?
Yes. What I mean by that is that we need to be aware when we create those barriers between cultures, and often the intention is sincere. It's in order to protect cultures and heritages. We might end up being in a world of separate communities. So in order to keep that culture of exchange and be willing to accept that regardless to our differences, we need to coordinate, we need to cooperate. We have to invent a way to separate ourselves from any kind of divisive discourse. And sometimes even discourses with good intention can be divisive. And that's what I fear the most.
Even if these divisive discourses where some get their gas to put this fire of, in a world full of fire, saying we should be separated, how do you put out this fire of we're better alone with a narrative of no, we're better together then in this case?
It's a balancing act. and it's also an act of respect. And what I mentioned before, what I like to call cultural sensitivity. We have to be culturally very sensitive and treat others with not only intellectual knowledge, but also with emotional knowledge. And that can be very well done through art and music and theater. And needless to talk about how much do we lack poetics in our discourse nowadays. We tend to plunge way too much in politics. It's something which I totally understand. We have enough problems and predicaments to worry about. But once we lack our ability to imbue poetics in our lives, in our conversation, then we might risk lacking the ability to envision a different version of the world. And only a different version of the world could lead us to a radical change. And that should be coming out of poetics integrated in our way of thinking, in our way of perceiving the world and perceiving the relationship between each other. That's what I like. That's what I miss the most from the Orient, because somewhat we still have the language of metaphor. We still have poetics deeply entrenched in our whether bodily language or spoken language, and somewhat the conversation in the West has become a bit way too. Let me borrow this from Max Weber. Way too standardized, way too sharp, way too clear, and lacks the possibility to carry different meanings. And I would love to retain that, because Hölderlin once said, "Dichterlich wohnet der Mensch." It is actually one of the main inspiration of myself, how to live poetically, comes from the belief that poetics is an existential need for us nowadays in order to be able to voice the unknown, the unspoken, and thus creating a better version of the world to which we could yearn.
Khabit?
Yeah, you would have to ask the question again.
Yeah. Well, I would say the following to what you just described. In a world of clickbait and short-term TikTok videos, a poem takes a while now.
Yeah, we can try the haiku.
Yeah.
Well, I always tend to poeticize the conversation rather than to politicize it. So forgive me if
not at all.
I take that role upon myself.
Yeah, but there was a time that we took, as you said, there was a time we took time, as you said, from the audience or where I come from. The imagination had the brain, that the part of the brain that had to imagine things had plenty to work with because our conversation demanded it. But as you said, in a world snuffed out of imagination and everything is simpler enough to explain, we still miss a lot. And in a world, the reason I say TikTok videos and everything else is it's become the attention-based economy, and no one can pay attention for so long, which is why art and its exposition has become hard to do.
And can be the cure.
Yeah, and yet, that being the case, the world seems to go the other way of instant gratification and certain things being even shorter and shorter to the point where they're incomprehensible.
I think it's very important to hold on there, because the reason why we have knowledge not being passed down in a certain way doesn't work for us. So whatever, if technology is advancing and it's causing us to be in a constant rush, then we are risking not having the time to have the necessary conversations. We are risking seeking hiding from ourselves, from our society, somewhere else, while we should be with each other. I'm very happy that, it's somehow sad, but I have the notion that now with the climate crisis, we are getting to a point where we are starting to understand that, or we are starting to understand universalism. And it's very important that we also recognize the role of capitalism, the role capitalism has played in this, the alienation from our own selves and certain topics which are relevant to us and human beings, how democracy is playing out on us, that we have democracy in ways that actually people should be participating, but decisions are being made and no one, you ask people in the morning, no one knows when that decision was passed on and how we went and how we got there. So while we are constantly running away from ourselves, I think that's when things happen in ways where we will feel disempowered. We would not know as society how to go about it. We are learning to seek refuge somewhere else, to alienate ourselves from reality, taking responsibility, than targeting whatever we need to target. So it's very important that while we are bringing in technology, this technology should also assist us, not just on the capitalist terms of working, and getting more and exploiting more, while others are being exploited somewhere else more. We are spending more TikTok time, we are spending more time online, we are having more virtual relationships, but when we go out and see people, then we need to learn now how to deal with each other. So I'm very, very grateful for technology which is advancing. I wish that the climate crisis really bring us to a point where we start to see each other as people who are connected, and that if 3 mangoes go missing in Timbuktu and are here, what that means. Or if one country is supplying the world with a material which is being used for all technology devices we are using, which means over 90% from it, that everyone who is using these devices know how they are connected to the person in the minds. So let the technology be used to connect us to ourselves than to be used to alienate us from discourses which we should be having for a better advancement of all.
Boy, these two are very positive, and I don't know what to say, honestly, because what I see here is, with the climate crisis, what I see is a lot of people disturbed from their livelihood, seeking refuge. That's going to make this part of the world the prime target, however it's going to be explained. With the cultural sense, what I have seen, if I were to speak of, is Afro house or Afro music has become. No, it is what it is. It's the global #1 music being played amongst the youth. And yet no one knows from where this comes from in its origins, the way everybody knew in the 80s of who Fela Kuti and what Nigeria was. And therefore, yes, technology can actually empower us to find information, but it's also putting gaps in between which packets of knowledge has to be released and which one is to be taken away.
Continuities of colonialities, which is why I say we need to address them, because on certain areas we recognize them, we use them, we profit from them, but then we turn to shut out certain information. We are selectively using resources and information the way we want, to our advantages and to the disadvantages of others. So we need to revisit this, because if we are saying certain resources are for every human being. Every human being needs music, every human being needs water, clean water, air. So we cannot have a situation globally where this is not distributed in the way that each individual on this planet feels represented. That's where we need to be going to. We need to start moving away from the nation states for our people against the other people, and really saying, okay, what has capitalism brought us when it comes to distribution of resources? How have other people been treated And then from there on saying, okay, we need to redistribute this. And with capitalism, when we commodify certain resources, what does that mean for certain people? So we even the structures we have now, the way we have been taught to look at ourselves globally needs to change. We need to revisit that. We need to make laws that are not just national laws. Because everyone needs a mango to eat, everyone needs rice, everyone needs wheat for their bread. So while we are doing this national thing, we need to include the global communities.
About the selective shining of things. Ali, is there such a thing as a selective block shining of culture that you see, where certain things are highlighted, whereas they should be presented in a cultural scene with other things?
What worries me a lot, as I mentioned before, is when cultural events are highlighted only to their representational value, and not necessarily to their quintessence, to their depth, and to the challenges that they propose, whether for the performer or for the listener. That makes a pathway towards some sort of a mediocrity.
But surely the culture has origins, and the cultural practitioner can use its origins to express certain things, right?
Absolutely. I'm a clear example. You shall hear in some time that I
a few minutes.
A few minutes. That I personally benefit a lot from my own tradition as someone who was born and grew up in Syria. But equally, I benefit from a whole lot from all different other cultural endeavors and cultural heritages. And sometimes I keep that for myself, and sometimes I tend to disclose that. So I personally, my sole objective is to craft a voice of my own that would enable me to reach your hearts, regardless to the cultural tools, cultural means that in my disposition.
Well said. I will have this last question, and then we'll go to the said presentation by Ali. If we are talking about integration and its discontents, as I call them, I always think of it, unfortunately, because I have a radio show which talks politics this whole time. It's called the Minority Report. And as much as artistically I would like to express things, the politics gets in the way. So let me have a last political question for this cultural conversation we're having. I believe in lobbying to be represented. I believe a political system is a marketplace of ideas, or it was at least. And I believe to be seen, you have to actually make an effort. Otherwise, the politics lets you go. So if I were to ask this question, I've written it, I could write it, I could read it. The prevailing wisdom of best political lobbying is when one has one minority to represent, and thus we run around thinking in bubbles of our own kind, be it Turkish or African or Syrian. And I suspect that's holding us back. Go away. So when I talk of this political lobbying, I will just like to have this question for us. Who speaks for us? Do we have someone versed going right the way to the Chancellery of Berlin or the Eiffel Tower of France, or you name it? Who actually is who speaks for us? Who voices our concerns?
I would love to be Khabit.
And
you would love to be you who's going to represent us freely.
Okay. Thank you.
Conversation ended.
Yeah, I would like to say, I think it's necessary that we look at institutions, structures that have been put in place, and even language. We started with the language, what terms mean. And I would like to revisit the word lobby. What is a lobby? A lobby it's pretty corrupt. It's not a representation. It's a false representation because I can buy my way through the lobby and get whatever I want. So I think while we talk advocacy, we are also in this old structure of looking at how representation should take place. If representation should take place through lobby, it means we must work our way through, and if we want, we can even bribe someone and get there and let them do whatever we paid them to do.
In other words, we a collection of honest politicians doing honest God's work.
So because there's even dishonesty in democracy and organizing communities, we have to be aware of that. That if we are looking out for transformation, we really need to be aware of the structures which we have now, how they function, and how they were installed. So if we don't need this for the future, then we need a different language, we need a different approach, which is not, we are buying ourselves through this, but we are here, and therefore we matter. And automatically, because we matter, we should be sitting on the table if we want a democracy where we are expecting citizens to participate, and not a democracy where we have politicians having their own agendas. Civil societies know nothing about that. They make the decision and make the announcement. So we need to start getting into organizing community societies in a way that each person matters and coming down to the ground level to have communication discussions with communities, because that's how we keep people engaged. So for us as the so-called migrants or refugees, whatever term, people on the move, whatever terms we are using, we have people that represent us because, as I said, in most, like the German parliament, it's not just made of white Germans. There's diversity. There's diversity coming in, you know. So they are there, but then they should be seen. I've also had situations where I have seen migrant politicians defending certain rights, like when the GEARS was passed on, you had people standing up in the parliament in their own parties and saying, I feel like I have been giving a slap into my face, because these are people with this background. So we should be having more representation. And if we say in Berlin, every third person in Berlin is a migrant, then that's a huge number. We are here, so let our structures represent what the reality is.
I barely have anything to add upon that, so that was a wonderful
but who
presentation.
Speaks for us culturally?
I hope
of our diversity, from a lot together we come as one, or for our inherited experience for where we come from, the Oriental side as you described, and your ability and given right to mix whatever pleases you to create something.
I would welcome anyone who has the means to tell us in a metaphorical language about who we are, and while reaching deep into our hearts, exposing its heart to us. It's as Hassan al-Haffar, one of the Aleppian Qawwali singers, those who sing spiritual songs in Aleppo, said once, from heart to heart. Whoever who has the ability to communicate through hearts is my representative in the cultural scene.
And we need more of them, God help us. Okay, this has been Civic Cities Representation, third part. I'm just closing up with us first. We have been chatting now for about an hour and 20 minutes with regards to what culture, representation, society, and what like. it's about time I gave you all a chance to have a question if you have for our audience. And now this conversation is open. Whoever have a question, we are welcome to ask such a question. A mic will be given to you, to whoever has the next question or comments or suggestions.
First of all,
It's not on.
now? Yeah. First of all, thank you very much for this very inspiring conversation we have the privilege to listen to. There were so many thoughts going through my mind during the conversation, but one really stuck. Ali, would you agree that we have exchanged a poetic life with a competitive life?
Yes, absolutely. And I want to separate competitiveness from struggle, because I do believe that we've got to be able to struggle. That's something we experienced as someone who lived in Syria in the 80s during that socialist period, where life conditions were quite hard, and we endured scarcity on all aspects. So, although on one hand I wish no one would have to struggle, on the other hand I believe that to be able to put emotional labor into the pathway to strive is very essential. But the question is what we are striving for. That what is determined by our ability to look for deeper meanings, for meanings that are beyond our material life.
Can an artist thrive in a competing environment when the competition is necessarily not about art?
With a huge collateral damage.
Can I add something on that? I think competition is something which is very, very important and delicate, not just in the field of arts, but also generally in the economy, because competition, it's something that has brought us to capitalism. Competition is something that has brought us enmities amongst each other. So instead of creatively co-creating, we are more competition-driven. And with the competition-drivenness, we get into spaces where we cultivate greed culture, grind culture, and other stuff which does not permit us to evolve in a way that we could enjoy each other better. So I'm looking more into what does competition mean? What does being free of competition, how would that look like? And sometimes I have a picture I saw in the train last time where I was like, these were 3 kids. You could also see 3 kids with migrant background, and 2 of them could not talk yet. There was an elderly one who could talk. And I looked at the interaction between these 3 people, and I was like, wow, it's crazy. So if we adults could get on the level where we let our emotions and not the competition, how would this world be? How would we be creating stuff? How would we be treating each other? How would the economy look like?
What would culture be?
What would culture be? So I was there fantasizing on, okay, this looks like a dystopia, but certain things are possible with certain emotions. And when that whole competition is taken out of it, what other possibilities do we have?
May I answer to that if nobody else wants to ask a
Go
question?
ahead.
All right. so in my mind, competition always is in opposition to cooperation. And in my mind, competition is a core of capitalism. Yeah, because that is what capitalism depends on, to keep everyone in competition always, to, yeah, which leads then to the exploitation not only of people but also the resources Earth has. So competition for me is not a value, really. So I try to find alternatives to competition, and the first thing that comes to my mind is cooperation. So how can we move away from the competitiveness that by now has taken almost every area of our lives, because all areas of our lives are somehow yeah, you have to pay for them. Yeah, there's hardly any left, right? So, and I would like to find ways to get out of that. Not only the higher, more, yeah? How can we get there? Yes, please.
So, excuse me. Thank you very much for this conversation of tonight. I just want to add something, or maybe just throw another question, because we were talking also about co-creation. We were talking about poetic from heart to heart, the communication. So what I will be wondering in the future is especially which mechanics or which systemic framings of capitalism will still have an impact on even artistic processes. So, I mean, I know so many artists also here in Berlin struggling the whole time of shortage of possibilities to place really what they want. And I'm very much researching already during years the dynamics of what you are asked to do in the arts is very much connected to political, and I use the German word Haushaltsjahr. There is a connection. That's incredible. So really, when I sense the hand on my neck as an artist myself to develop an alternative to this framing, I really wish that actually capitalism would have no impact on encounter, multicultural encounter in framings in the arts. This would be so fabulous, really.
I would like to add something to that. I thought that the last documenta was a very good study case for that. Yeah, when you maybe you remember the kind of scandal that was going on over documenta. They had invited several communities, and one of the communities represented a piece of art that touched on certain German sensitivities, all right? And then the art director of Documenta stepped down because of that, and there was a huge discussion. Was it anti-Semitic? Was it not anti-Semitic? And right? And I thought then, if I allow a project like Documenta, which is huge, every 5 years, right? To follow their concept, to invite these communities, to invite these pieces of art that are not by one artist, but created by many people, right? Should I not then at least respect as an audience and the inviting country what those communities come up with, sensitivities or not. So for me, that was a study case, how capitalism really forms and dictates to some extent work in the arts.
But doesn't that smack of something that I've asked this before, and I was just talking to Karam about it. I don't believe in it. I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but I always think of gatekeepers. Whatever, as you just aptly described, if an artist is supposedly need to go to somewhere and describe, this is what I'm going to do with my art, and this is the audience, that art is lost already, because the artist requires the space, the nuance, to do what he pleases, but he is being asked specifically as to what happens, which means the conversation has to do with, okay, how much of what you are doing is closer aligning to my tastes, and therefore I could fund it instead of the artist being given far more leeway, which begs the question, do we have gatekeepers in this as well when it comes to it? But this is a question Ali would ask.
I will answer quickly with a story. The pupils of the Sufis in the medieval time, when they came to their masters asking them about the path to the divine, the masters used to answer them, get yourself a job. We should find a way to be financially independent. Maybe a universal income in the future might be the solution for creativity. Otherwise, having an independent, decent source of income would debilitate lots of freedom, but also will give and provide a huge independence and hence also freedom of artistic choices.
Well said. You can clap. Any other questions, suggestions? Steph?
Thank you so much. Stephanie is my name. I would like to come back to the question of political representation because I think it's rather important. I myself am engaging a little bit in a political party, and I always feel, of course, there are different levels, but as in the party, political parties are generally open, and it's always a question of time and resources and everything. You need to, but everybody can give input and can work in the programs of the political parties and also influence, therefore, what their representatives or their Bundestagsabgeordnete or whatever are then wanting in the parliament. And this is the one part I wanted to ask you if somehow you feel invited to take part or to work in political parties. And the other thing is, of course, that the most important thing is the right to vote, right? So you're not really represented if you cannot vote. There's nobody that actually represents you. Yeah.
That's what I was saying I'm not lobby, advocate. By lobbying, I could understand that, but the numbers speak for, you play in numbers. It's unfortunate, but that's the way the game is played. In a world where there is a few of you, the much larger of you, unless there is a law that says this part of the group needs to have its say, gets to be ruled by the rules of the many. Political representation, as far as I have my experience goes, I've been invited to a Senate meeting where everything else was decided but the procedure. And the procedure was where the conversation was about. And I thought I would have my say in what's going on, naively assuming that I will be asked to have my perspective or view on such a thing. And it took the whole day. And sometimes that's what a joke is. It takes a whole day to get to you. And at the end of it, I have gotten somebody whoever organized it and said, it's the other way around that you get to us, which is, I don't care if you implement it, ask us what's missing, Let's start from there as to a demand that could be aggregated into a block. Then you can ask, we will do this, and we can expand it. If you call me for what you would call somebody participated, a quota that you have to fill for minorities, a fine beginning, but I'm way past that now. But as Khabit also said, every third person is a migrant in this town. So here we're stronger in numbers, but also our contributions actually weigh quite a lot in Berlin. And I don't want to speak of the whole of Germany, but in here we have the responsibility and perhaps the chance to do more. Khabit?
Yeah, I think generally the way we have been organizing communities need to change. This is not just for migrants, but for global societies. We need to start centering us, humans. So while we have bureaucratic processes that will not allow anyone to participate, we say, yes, you have the right to participate, and it's open to everyone. But why is it that most of the population does not vote? Who ask themselves that question? It should be the responsibility of people, of politicians, to make sure that there are platforms where low-key everyone can participate, instead of having like processes which are very complicated. No one knows how they work. I need to learn. I need mentors to teach me if I want to read the Senate of Berlin, how I go. It shouldn't be that way. If we'd say democracy is for the people, then the people should have the access. But if we put institutions there and structures which are the biggest barriers to having the conversation with politicians, then I would say no. There are barriers. We need to look at the barriers and not assume that people have these options. Theoretically, yes. Practically, no one has the options. Only people with certain privileges have that option. And even that, they are doing it in their free time. And not everyone can afford that. Voting rights, there are people living in Germany 30 years. I've never voted. I'm one of those. I've never voted in my life, and I'm not alone. But each time I speak, people tell me you're Afro-German. I say, what? Why? Because I speak the language, but Afro-German, I'm not represented in your possibility to vote. So we need to start seeing institutions and politics as something which should be made for people and not for certain people, which means the access to it should be easy. Even a person at 16 years should know how to demand accountability from governments in certain ways. And this is where I think with technology, I'm really hoping that we break these barriers. So representation in politics is there, but generally I think what politics needs to restructure is how they meet civil societies on all levels. I would say globally, it's a global problem we have.
I would add this. For a Germany with that wretched history that has happened in the past, it is imperative that the political class understands these people should not beg you to ask, but you should actually beg them to make the political conversation better. The problem with echo chambers of looking at every other white person that actually votes in you, to increase the voting age, to increase the tariff rate of something to 1.5%, or the political energy you use to expand on the tiniest things could be used to expand on how the minorities in your country are faring. Because at the end of the day, the greatest virtue of democracy is the protection and enfranchisement of the minority. It's not the succession of the majority. And a system that keeps forgetting this, in enlightening its own society that the minorities amongst it are the most important, that they are the salt to the soup that makes it taste better, understand better, enriched life, and capacities grown. And so the political class needs to be reminded every now and then that these are the people that actually tell you other than what you have used to, what you have written in political thought, philosophized about, and published endlessly. These are the people who are the outsiders, who would bring something that has not yet heard in. And it's imperative that it listens to these systems, because let's not forget, populism is making quite a comeback. And in a system that seems to be on its racks, it could never be said enough that the minorities be asked for what their opinion is or how they cooperate with the majority. Okay, I think we've had a nice conversation here. I would let Ali do his thing now. I would like to thank you for this third part of our Civic City conversation.
I'm not alone doing this. May I introduce
By all means.
the work and the artist? The performance which we are going to present before you is prepared together with Yara Mekkawi. She is an artist, sound artist, archivist, podcaster from Egypt. Together, we prepared, specially for the series, a performance based on readings, excerpts from the introduction that Ibn Khaldun, the known scholar and philosopher in the medieval time during the golden age of Islamic philosophy, he wrote an introduction, a book called Muqaddimah, and we're going to read excerpts from the Muqaddimah. Yara is going to read in Arabic, in Egyptian accent, beautiful accent, Arab's most favorite accent. And while she also plays electronics on her laptop, I will intervene compositionally and musically. There will be translation to English projected on the display, hopefully also to German as well. And the one who did the translation for us, guess who?
Karam.
ChatGPT 4.
Oh no.
I only had
The
to
new Karam.
tweak a handful of sentences. Viel Vergnügen.
Thank you very much. We will be doing this again in September. Thank you for being here, and let's have a bit of a 10-minute break, and we'll come back for some music. Thank you.
العمران هو التساكن والتنازل في مصر، أو حلة للأنس بالعشرة واقتضاء الحاجات لما في طباعهم من التعاون على المعاش. الظلم مؤذن بخراب العمران، الظلم مؤذن بخراب العمران، العالم بستان. المدن والأمصار ذات هياكل وأجرام عظيمة وبناء كبير، إذ هي موضوعة للعموم لا للخصوص، فتحتاج إلى اجتماع الأيدي وكثرة التعاون. الظلم مؤذن بخراب العمران، الظلم مؤذن بخراب العمران، العالم بستان. إذا بنيت المدينة وكمل تشييدها بحسب نظر من شيدها وبمن اقتضته الأحوال السماوية والأرضيات فيها، فعمر الدولة حينئذ عمر لها، فإن كان أمد الدولة قصيرا وقف الحال فيها عند انتهاء الدولة وتراجع عمرانها وخربت، وإن كان أمد الدولة طويلا ومدته منفسحة فلا تزال المصانع فيها تشاد والمنازل الرحيبة تكثر وتتعدد ونطاق الأسوار يتباعد وينفسح. الظلم مؤذن بخراب العمران، الظلم مؤذن بخراب العمران، العالم بستان. المدن قرار تتخذه الدول عند حصول الغاية المطلوبة من الطرف ودواعيه، فتؤثر الدعوى والسكون وتتوجه إلى اتخاذ المنازل للقرار. ولما كان ذلك القرار والمأوى وجب أن يراعى فيه دفع المضار بالحماية من طوارقها وجلب المنافع وتسهيل المرافق لها، ومما يراعى في ذلك للحماية من الآفات السماوية وطيب الهواء للسلامة من الأمراض. فإن الهواء إذا كان ركيدا خبيثا أو مجاورا لمياه فاسدة ومنافع متعفنة أو مروج خبيثة أسرع إليه العفن في مجاورتها، فأسرع المرض للحيوان الكائن فيه لا محالة.
الظلم مؤذن بخراب العمران، الظلم مؤذن بخراب العمران،
العالم بستان. فلتعلم أن الحضارة في العمران أيضا كذلك، لأنه غاية لا مزيد وراءها، وذلك أن الطرف والنعمة إذا حصل لأهل العمران دعداهم بطبعه إلى مذهب الحضارة والتخلق بعوائدها، والحضارة كما علمت هي التفنن في الطرف واستجدت أحواله والكلف بالصنائع التي تونق في أصنافه وسائر فنونه. الظلم مؤذن بخراب العمران، الظلم مؤذن بخراب العمران، العالم بستان. إن المدينة إذا كسر فيها غرس النارجن تأذنت بالخراب، حتى إن كثيرا من العامة يتحاشون غرس النارجن بالدور تطيرا به، وليس المراد ذلك أنه لا طيرة في النارجن، وإنما معناه أن البساتين وأجزاء المياه هي من توابع الحضارة. ثم إن النارجن والليم والسور وأمثال ذلك من الطعام لا طعام فيه ولا منفعة، هو من غايات الحضارة إذا يقصد بها في البساتين إلا أشكالها فقط، ولا تغرس إلا بعد التفنن في مذاهب الطرف، وهذا هو الطور الذي يخشى معه هلاك مصر وأخرابه. الظلم مؤذن بخراب العمران، الظلم مؤذن بخراب العمران، العالم بستان. إن الصنائع إنما تكمن بكمال العمران الحضاري وكثرته، والسبب في ذلك أن الناس ما لا يستوفي العمران الحضاري وتمدن المدينة، إنما همهم في الضروري أن من المعاش، وهو تحصيل الأقوات من الحنطة وغيرها. فإن تمدنت المدينة وتزايدت فيها الأعمال ووفر بالضروري وزادت عليها الصرف الزائد، حينئذ إلى الكمالات من المعاش. ثم إن الصنائع والعلوم إنما هي من الإنسان من حيث فكره الذي يتميز به عن الحيوانات والقوت، له من حيث الحيوانية والغذائية، فهو متقدم ضرورته على العلوم والصنائع، وهي متأخرة عن الضروري. وعلى مقدار العمران البلد تكون جودة الصنائع للتأنق فيها، حينئذ جودة ما يطلب منها بحسب دواعي الترف والثروة. الظلم بخراب العمران. الظلم مؤذن بخراب العمران. العالم بستان. يعظم عمران المدينة ويتسع فيكثرون، وربما يرجع الحكام إلى نظر هؤلاء فيما أبصر به من أحوال البناء، وذلك أن الناس في المدن الكثيرة الازدحام والعمران يتحاشون حتى في الفضاء والهواء الأعلى والأسفل وفي الانتفاع بظاهر البناء، مما يتوقع معه حصول الضرر في الحيطان فيمنع جاره من ذلك إلى ما كان فيه من حق. ويختلفون أيضا في استحقاق الطرق والمنافذ للمياه الجارية والفضلات المسربة في القنوات، وربما يدع بعضهم على بعض في حائطه أو علوة أو قناته تضايق الجوار، أو يدعو بعضا على جار اعتداء حائطه وخشية سقوطه، ويحتاج إلى الحكم عليه بهدمه ودفع ضرره عن جاره عندما يراه، أو يحتاج إلى قسمه دار أو عرض بين شريكين بحيث لا يقع معها فساد في دار ولا إهمال منفعتها. الظلم مؤذن بخراب العمران. الظلم مؤذن بخراب العمران. العالم بستان. الكتابة من خواص الإنسان التي تتميز بها عن الحيوان، وأيضا فإنها تطلع على مفيء الضمائر وتتآذى بها الأغراض إلى البلد البعيد فتقضي الحاجات، وقد دفعت مؤنة المباشر لها، ويطلع بها على العموم المعارف وصحف الأولين وما كتبوه في علومهم وأخبارهم، فهي شريفة بجميع هذه الوجوه والمنافع، وخروجهم من الإنسان من القوة إلى الفعل إنما يكون بالتعليم على قدر الاجتماعي العمراني والتناهي في الكمالات والطلب لذلك تكون جودة الخط في المدينة إذ هو من جملة الصنائع، وقد قدمنا إن هذا شأنها وإنها تابعة للعمران. أظن مؤذن بخراب العمران، أظن مؤذن بخراب العمران، العالم بستان.
Thank you. Thank you for. Thank you for this exceptional music that just provided us, Yara and Ali. Thank you everybody for coming. This has been a wonderful evening of great conversation and even greater music. We will be having our fourth part of Civic City on the 10th of September. We will be disclosing that it will also be in Akud Maknoy. and we will be delighted to have you all, many more of you as well. It will continue to happen in the Hof. Thank you all for coming, and have a very good night. Thank you. May I ask, can you come forward so that we can take a group photo?